The Bogosity Podcast, early and ad-free. Become a subscriber at Patreon, Subscribestar, or Discord. Use the links at donate.bogosity.tv.
Welcome to the Bogosity Podcast for the week of February 9, 2025, the podcast that squeezes the Charmin. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's jollify the news of the bogus. Last year, we covered the hideously corrupt court case against Tesla and Elon Musk to deny him any compensation from the last several years. After voting again for the compensation package, the stockholders voted to disincorporate in Delaware and reincorporate in Texas. As we covered, a lot of businesses are worried now about their Delaware incorporations. There was a lot of speculation from experts that others would now follow suit. And now we have a big one. Meta is now considering the same move from Delaware to Texas or a different state. The Wall Street Journal reported that people familiar with the matter said that Meta was in talks with Texas officials over the changes. This would change their state of incorporation, although their headquarters would still be in Menlo Park, California. So many businesses have incorporated in Delaware without actually being located there because of its reputation for being business-friendly. That reputation took a major hit last year. Texas is now building its own reputation for a more favorable business and regulatory environment with lower taxes and streamlined corporate governance. It wasn't just about Elon Musk. Several other companies have experienced unfair treatment at the Delaware Chancery Court from people who buy a few shares of stock and then sue on behalf of all stockholders, just like what happened with Tesla. Back in 2015, Dole Foods suffered from a similar lawsuit after selling the company for what the Chancery Court said wasn't enough money. Over the last decade, DuPont, Ancestry.com, and many others have appealed to Delaware state officials to find a way to curb these frivolous lawsuits. The problem is the standard of proof. Instead of the plaintiffs having the burden of establishing the preponderance of evidence, when a company is sued by stockholders in Delaware, they have the burden of showing their actions were, quote, entirely fair. And remember that the Tesla stockholders voting overwhelmingly that Musk's compensation package was fair and they wanted it to go through was given zero consideration by the Chancery Court. Meta would be the biggest one after Tesla, but they wouldn't be the only one. TripAdvisor is reincorporating in Nevada, another state passing business-friendly laws and regulations to attract businesses seeking to leave Delaware. Several other businesses, including Pershing Square, Trade Desk, and TransPerfect, either have moved or are considering a move from Delaware to Nevada, the biggest one being Dropbox. They all cite Delaware's legal environment as the reason for the move. Coinbase is also considering moving its incorporation, with its chief legal officer Paul Grewal tweeting, I've tried cases to Delaware juries, enjoyed friendships with Delaware judges, and taught classes to Delaware lawyers. The Hotel DuPont is a familiar stay, and I've bought too many shirts and ties to count at Wright & Simon in Wilmington. And so I share this with affection, not animosity. Delaware is at serious risk of losing its standing as the leading state of incorporation for American companies. It's still the case that 2/3 of Fortune 500 companies are incorporated in Delaware, so they'll still be the dominant state for the foreseeable future. But maybe if they lose a few more big dogs, they'll finally get the idea that these systems need to be reformed.
Sometimes you just have to stomp some skulls. From the mind of Mr. Dapperton, a game for the ages. In a world where a race of undead furries tries to take over the world's nuclear arsenal, one man must stop them. But which man? You choose. The Orange Overlord.
Ow, my ear!
Bernie Slanders. Debate Dominator,
My kippa's ruined.
or Joe Sleepy.
Build me back.
And of course, Mr. Fancy Pants himself.
Forget those losers! You can get the Gold Edition and play as 4 more characters, including me, the Spooky Spaceman, along with Billionaire Brat, Professor Proof, and the easiest way to play, as Jesus himself!
7 complete different worlds, with more coming all the time. Full controller support. You can even get eaten by a worm and pooped out into a furry cathedral.
And don't forget that Gold Edition, where you can play the ultimate challenge, Devil's Doorstep.
This gory satirical adventure pulls no punches. You know you want this game. Go to links.pogosity.tv/Skullstompers and play Skull Stompers now.
Wow, this has been a big week for the Trump administration as he makes good on another campaign promise to investigate the weaponization of the justice system and corruption in the FBI. The administration sent a questionnaire to FBI employees asking for details about any participation they may have had at, near, or involving the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2001. Doesn't sound like a big deal until you remember our coverage that it really sounds like the FBI, DHS, and others had at least 50 agents in the crowd that day, probably a lot more. Trump is getting to the bottom of that, and we know the FBI has been doing everything they can to hide it. The FBI Agents Association has sent out copy pasta to agents to stick in place of their own words about what they were doing on that day. They wrote, "In consultation with our FBI AA attorneys in the field, it is recommended that you include the following language in question number 11 and choose other that provides a free text box. The responses in this survey are provided based upon my current knowledge, information, and belief. I have been directed to respond to this survey in an extremely short time frame and with minimal information. Furthermore, all of the questions, except one, do not allow for any written explanation. I am told I am required to respond to this survey without being afforded appropriate time to research my answers, speak with others, speak with counsel or other representation. I have not been advised if these answers are being provided for informational purpose, administrative inquiry, security division inquiry, or criminal inquiry. I have not been advised of my rights in this matter. To the best of my ability and belief, I have performed my duties in accordance with the DIOG, federal statutes, and the Constitution of the United States, and the matters I worked on were properly predicated under DIOG and were opened and investigated at the direction of the Department of Justice." So, if it's just about what you did and what you experienced, what would you need to research? Why would you need to speak with others? Any good investigator will tell you not to let witnesses do any of that. No collaboration to get your story straight. As for the counsel thing, this is fundamentally a boss asking questions of his employees. There's nothing at all unusual about this. Even these questionnaires are fairly routine at the FBI. Only now are they screeching and clutching their pearls about it. But it's also true that they still have the right to remain silent, and so it really depends on 2 different things. If you're not concerned that you're going to be charged with a crime, then there should be no issue filling out the questionnaire honestly. And if you are concerned you might be charged with anything, the correct advice is not to stick in this pre-prepared statement. The correct advice is to keep your yap shut. The only reason for wanting them to stick this text in there is not for the protection of the individual agents, but for the higher-ups. It actually goes against the interests of the agents to make this statement that they're now stuck with if further action is taken. A lot of this concerning information about the FBI came from whistleblowers such as Garrett O'Boyle, who was suspended after he testified in Congress along with Steve Friend and Marcus Allen. All 3 whistleblowers were suspended without pay and lost their security clearances. O'Boyle posted on X, "The Justice Department should suspend all employees who use FBIAA's canned response for lack of candor. EM who are telling employees to use the canned response and are flat out refusing should be fired for insubordination. Funny, FBIAA, You refused to assist the thousands of employees who didn't want to inject an unwanted and emergency use authorized only product into their body. But suddenly you have interest in providing legal assistance to thousands who may be affected. He then posted what he called the Idiot's Guide to Know How You Know the FBI Has Been Subverted by Marxists. They included political persecutions of J6ers, of people and families like Amy Nelson who had over $500,000 seized without any criminal charges, of whistleblowers like Ethan Haim, whom we covered back in November, IRS whistleblowers Gary Shapley and Joseph Ziegler, and countless other examples, persecutions that, quote, were not only accepted, they were done with Marxian glee by those who had headed them up, and very few were willing to help any of us stand for the truth or even get our stories out. Suddenly, there is massive resistance to perceived weaponized government with droves of government attorneys, outside attorneys, and executive management resisting. Maybe y'all shouldn't have so eagerly been the secret police under Biden, and you wouldn't have found yourselves in this spot. The fact is, you're a public servant. You work for the government. You don't have the privilege of hiding what you did as an agent from your bosses or the American people. It's called transparency, which is the first step toward accountability. Apparently, they don't like that. If you're on the Wi-Fi in a coffee shop or hotel, anyone on that network can get your traffic. Do you really trust all of those strangers? For that matter, do you really trust your ISP? A VPN can protect you from prying eyes, disguise your location, and even foil government censors. It's essential in this day and age, so go to vpn.pagosity.tv and you'll be taken to BoxPN. Starting at just $2.99 a month, you can get unlimited high-speed connections to VPN servers all over the world, and they don't log connections, so your privacy is assured. Traveling abroad, just VPN home, and don't worry about what those other governments are doing. Back at home, stop your ISP from traffic shaping and messing with the quality internet access you're paying good money for. You can connect from multiple machines at once, including your smartphone or tablet, and it supports all the secure standards, including OpenVPN and SSTP. Bypass censors and surveillance with your own secure VPN connection. Go to vpn.pagosity.tv. Another campaign promise was to turn Elon Musk loose with a Department of Government Efficiency, which Trump did by adapting the Obama-created United States Digital Service to the United States Doge Service. Unless you've been living under a rock, you don't need me to tell you about the screeching that's ensued from that, but we do need to talk a bit about his first big target, the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID. Ostensibly an agency responsible for administering foreign aid, based on the information that's come out, an overwhelming amount of it was used for grift and money laundering. The left is oddly vocal about defending an agency that oversaw the forced sterilization of 300,000 indigenous women in Latin America in the 1990s. As for more recent examples, a lot of them are flying fast and heavy, but I do want to get a couple in that deserve not to be lost amid the noise. One is the complaint of Nayib Bukele, president of El Salvador, who tweeted, U.S. taxpayers should know that their government is using their money to fund communist movements against a democratically elected and with a 90% approval rating government in El Salvador. It's not working though. Laughing emoji. The people of El Salvador won't go back to that terrible past. He posted pictures of Salvadorans protesting in the streets. Another big one is Politico, not because it's Politico specifically, but because it's a media outlet and one that's used by other media outlets and social media to fact-check posts. Matthias Döpfner, CEO of Axel Springer, which owns Politico, said, quote, Politico, since its launch 18 years ago, has never taken a cent of government subsidies or state funding. Trump is absolutely wrong. He's doing what they always do. Play around with language. There are no subsidies to Politico, but they are making, wink wink, payments for an insanely overpriced service that no one else seems to want. Quote, so people are paying for Politico Pro because they need the service. It's not subsidies, it's capitalism. It's not capitalism when government is involved. This is the classic way of hiding a bribe. Just like Hunter Biden's paintings, you sell something for a ridiculous amount and just say you're providing a product or service. If anything, it just demonstrates how wrong they knew it was ahead of time. And it's not just Politico. Revelations published by WikiLeaks show that USAID was funding over 6,200 journalists across 707 media outlets and 279 media NGOs, including 90% of the media outlets in Ukraine. Just to show how far the corruption goes, a federal judge in the District Court for the District of Columbia, whose corruption is incredibly well documented, passed a TRO blocking the DOJ employees from accessing Treasury Department systems and records. But how is that legal? The head of the executive branch, actually the entirety of the executive branch according to the Constitution, has just told his people to let him see his own documents. So how can the judiciary interfere in internal executive matters? Also, your reminder that because of his position in SpaceX, Elon Musk has had top secret clearance for years now. He's always been trusted with classified information. They just want to do an audit of the Treasury systems. And apparently, the Treasury will do anything to avoid that. Notice a pattern? Now, the big response here, of course, is all the horrible things that will happen if Trump gets his way. One of them is your secret Treasury information like your Social Security number. But if you're a longtime listener of this podcast, you'll remember breaches such as Equifax, Office of Personnel Management, National Public Data, and others, which means that, sorry, but if you've got a Social Security number, it's out there. If Elon wanted it, he could just buy it on the dark web. But the screeching comes from the same people who continue to call Edward Snowden a traitor for exposing their illegal spying activities without once calling for any of the actual criminals to be charged, as well as vociferously opposing the strong encryption that could have protected us from all that. Make no mistake, that information is out there and was long before Elon. It's far too late to start making a fuss about it now. The other is how cutting USAID will cut off money to starving children in Africa, which seems to be just a tiny amount of USAID's budget. But that's what they do. Use the grift mostly for themselves, but when it's a cut, point to the tiny amount that can tug at your heartstrings. And, let's face it, even that's probably not going where it's supposed to. Programmer and tech author Perry E. Metzger came up with the perfect term for this. A hostage puppy. He posted on X, "A group spends much or most of its time and money in horrible, counterproductive ways, but they are also keeping an extremely cute and vulnerable puppy alive. If anyone tries to cut their funding or shut them down, they wheel out the puppy, show its soulful eyes to the camera, and explain that if their budget is cut or if they are shut down, the cute little puppy will die." The puppy takes many forms and can be more or less literal. Sometimes there's almost literally a puppy, or a homeless child with cancer, or a starving family. The puppy can take many forms, but the common theme is that if you try to fix or shut down the failing organization, everyone will learn you're a puppy killer. Surely you wouldn't want to be a puppy killer. In fact, you should take the puppy away from the people holding it hostage. They probably don't have its best interests at heart if they're using it that way. The term seems to be catching on, at least on X. Yes, it's a perfect term for so much of what government does. It could be actual puppies, or starving children, or the homeless, or climate change, or whatever. Whenever someone makes any sort of claim like that, just remember one thing. We need to take that puppy away from them. I want to tell you about the eyeglasses I've been wearing for years. As people can see on my videos, I have a very strong prescription, which makes glasses more expensive, especially when I need computer glasses, reading glasses, prescription sunglasses, and most expensively, progressive lenses for general everyday wear. To save money while still getting quality glasses, I get them from Firmoo. In fact, I just got a pair of progressives with high-index aspherical lenses and a nice pair of frames my wife loves for just over $100. It would have been $500 to get them through my eye doctor. Not only do they look good, the glasses are durable. I've worn many pairs for several years without problems. All orders come with a 30-day return policy, a 3-month warranty, and one-on-one customer service. Go to Firmoo, that's FIRMOO.Bogosity.tv anytime you need quality glasses at a low price. Once again, that's Firmoo.Bogosity.tv. And now it's time to misidentify this week's biggest bogon emitter. And this week it goes to YouTube, and it's not for anything new, but it does kind of highlight how the problem is today. After things like the Twitter files and the Facebook files, and with the USAID revelations coming fast and furious, we've got a good idea how many social media sites were manipulated by government in the background. We still know precious little about YouTube, despite the fact that we've got enough stories of bad YouTube takedowns to fill volumes. This goes back even before Trump's first term. Way back in 2012, Tim Cushing wrote on TechDirt, quote, "In rare cases, the takedown isn't legit. Sometimes it's just a clerical error, or maliciousness, or a faulty algorithm. This way, interested parties can contact the party listed if they feel the takedown is an error. Again, this is a rare occurrence, one that has only happened a handful of times. Like here, for example. And here. And here. And here. Oh, there's also this one. And this other time. Another rarity. Once in a lifetime experience. Well below the expected margin of error. Yes, all of these are hyperlinked to bogus takedowns. Nothing to see here either. Anomaly, freak accident, outlier. In short, it's a handy way to tell at a glance who took the video down and decide whether or not the takedown might be in error. The problem isn't that these takedowns continued. The problem is they've gotten worse, and Google shrouds these cases in increasing opacity. One YouTube channel belonging to Artemy Pavlov, after more than 15 years without any issue, completely disappeared. No warnings, no strikes, nothing. Gone. The only clue being spam and deceptive policies. When it came to the attention of journalists at Ars Technica, the channel was restored within 3 hours, again with no explanation. And the only thing YouTube had to say was, quote, "Sometimes we make mistakes trying to get it right. We're sorry for any frustration our mistake caused you." Sorry, but that just isn't good enough. What will you do to stop this in the future? What about when it happens to smaller channels who can't get a major media outlet to get a bat for them? Ars had reported, YouTube spokesperson Boot Bullwinkle. Wait, is that an actual name? Boot Bullwinkle? Anyway, did not respond when Ars asked if it was possible to know what content triggered the mistaken channel ban, or confirm that Cinevibes had no strikes on record prior to the ban. Bullwinkle would only confirm that YouTube considered this case resolved, then stopped responding. Well, at least it's more than you get from Team YouTube on X. No word as of yet if YouTube has banned Moose and Squirrel. Why not just tell us what happened? What would be the big friggin' deal if we knew the details of how this happened and why? Wouldn't it give much lacking credibility and confidence to YouTube from their community? The distrust and confusion that this system breeds would mean instant death for any platform that had a reasonable amount of competition. Right now, YouTube's dominance is protecting them, but maybe they won't be able to rely on that forever. So all of that makes YouTube this week's biggest bogon emitter. Do you have children, or nieces or nephews? Are you homeschooling, or just want to counter some of the socialist indoctrination most children get in school? If so, go to bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins, and you'll be taken to a website where you can get some great books for elementary-aged children. The Tuttle Twins books are books about liberty and free market economics that include children's versions of Bastiat's The Law, Leonard Read's I, Pencil, and Hayek's The Road to Serfdom, as well as books about the Federal Reserve and how regulations protect business cronies. They'll learn about the harm caused by eminent domain, or regulations passed in the name of safety, and fundamental concepts of liberty. And as you can see from the sample pages on the website, they're all easy to read and nicely illustrated. They're just $9.99 a piece, or get a special discount as well as free bonuses when you purchase all 5. You can even buy in bulk to donate to schools and local libraries. So get the Tuttle Twins books at bogosity.tv/Tuttle Twins. And now let's aestheticize this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. Man, I remember when the Register was one of the best tech rags out there. It hasn't been that in a good many years. But this is a big low IQ take even for them. It's not even that it's taking the wrong position on nuclear power. It's not intelligent enough to do that. So they're talking about X-Energy's new Generation 4 pebble bed reactors that they're wanting to build in Texas next to a Dow chemical plant and up in Washington to power Amazon data centers. Dow and Amazon are both putting up considerable investment money for the project. The headline is, Amazon-backed X-Energy bags $700 million more for itty-bitty nuke reactors that don't exist yet. And if that's not dumb enough, the subtitle is, Looking forward to someone putting the new into nuclear. Yeah, someone actually thought that was clever. I mean, it's better than the idiotic nuclear fear-mongering we get from Greenpeace and other such groups, but what happened to doing basic research into your story? If you want to hear about this reactor with far more knowledge than they have, pause this podcast now and watch the YouTube video in the show notes about their new XE100 reactor. So they reported, as with most SMR projects in the United States, X-Energy's design has yet to receive approval from America's Nuclear Regulatory Commission. A better bit of reporting would be to point out that the NRC has approved precisely 0 new types of reactors since its inception. Quote, X-Energy didn't answer questions about whether it has a working reactor yet. It has announced multiple partnerships and development plans, including a collaboration with Dow to build its first XE100 power plant at Dow's Seadrift Operations Facility in Texas. Dow said in 2023 that the project was expected to be completed by the end of the decade. Again, we need to see a working reactor from X-Energy first. Wait, they need to build a reactor before they can build a reactor? Huh? They actually do a not too shabby job describing the TRISO fuel it uses. Probably because they don't understand it enough to screw it up and they're just passing on tech copy. But even then, they just can't help interjections like, quote, each uranium oxycarbide TRISO fuel pellet is encased in a triple-layer carbon and ceramic shell, effectively acting as its own containment vessel to, ideally, cough, prevent the release of radioactive fission products. Wow, do you not understand how the thing is set up? Initially, there's not much to worry about, as uranium is pretty doggone stable, and the only thing you have to worry about is alpha particles, which can be blocked by a piece of paper or cloth. No way they're getting outside of those pellets. While it's running, it's in a shielded reactor, so that's no issue. So that just leaves the waste. But the XE100 burns all the high-level waste, so you're just left with the radioactive byproducts, like cesium-137. But what you're worried about there is beta radiation, which, again, isn't getting outside the pellet. The pellet ends up being its own dry cask container. The products of the radioactive waste will disappear in just 300 years and become safe long before then. Quote, as of now, and as far as we're aware, only one SMR design has received approval for construction in the U.S., NuScale's design. Yeah, bad research. The NRC went back on NuScale as we covered. I don't know. Not a terrible take, just a dumb one. And the thing of it is, so much of this could have been easily corrected with a bit of publicly available research. That's the thing about the low IQ set. They don't even realize when they need to do the research. So all of that makes the Register this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. Well, that wraps up this Hugus the Whatzler edition of the Bogosity Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please go to donate.bogosity.tv for several ways to support and discord.bogosity.tv to join the discussion. Subscribe at the Discord or at Patreon or Subscribestar, and you can listen early and ad-free. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Robert Heinlein. Every law that was ever written opened up a new way to graft. The Bogosity Podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License.
Bogosity.